Chapter 20. The Return of the Commons. 1. The Digital Turn. Poststructuralist Author Theory. As we entered the final chapter of the Great Theft, the rigid fences of the 19th century began to dissolve under the pressure of the digital revolution. The first cracks appeared not in the law, but in philosophy. In the late 20th century, thinkers like Roland Barthes and Michel Foucault launched a conceptual assault on the very foundation of the enclosure: the author. In his seminal 1967 essay, The Death of the Author, Barthes argued that a text is not a line of words releasing a single theological meaning, the message of the author God, but a multidimensional space where a variety of writings, none of them original, blend and clash. This post-structuralist turn suggested that every creator is merely a remixer of a pre-existing common source. If the author is dead, then the personality interest that Luther and Kant used to justify the enclosure dies with him. In this reality, the Great Theft was reframed as a grand delusion. The digital age proved Barthes right. On the internet, every act of reading is an act of copying. The computer doesn't distinguish between using an idea and possessing it. As the binary code dematerialized the physical book even further than the French revolutionaries could have imagined, the fence began to look like an ancient, crumbling ruin in a world of fluid, infinite reproduction. 2. Open access movements and the GNU project. While philosophers dismantled the author, a new generation of digital peasants began to tear down the fences from the inside. This resistance was born in the world of software, led by Richard Stallman and the GNU project. Stallman realized that if code, the alphabet of the digital age, was enclosed by copyright, the future of human knowledge would be a private fiefdom. In a stroke of legal genius, Stallman created copyleft. Instead of using the law to keep people out, he used the law to keep the work open. The GNU General Public License, GPL, ensured that the software remained a digital commons forever. Anyone could use it, study it, change it, provided they kept their own versions just as free. This was the first successful counter-enclosure. It was followed by the Creative Commons and open access movements, which provided a way for creators to voluntarily return their work to the soil of the public domain. These movements proved that the Great Theft could be reversed through the very legal tools that had created it.
3. Copyright history as a common source. To look back at the history of copyright is to realize that the fence has always been an anomaly. For the vast majority of human history, culture was a common source. The stories of Homer, the plays of Shakespeare, the folk melodies of the world. They were not owned, they were inherited. In this section, we re-examine the Great Theft as a temporary fever in the history of human consciousness. We see that the struggle was never between property and theft, but between control and participation. The history we have traced, from the Roman plagiarists to the Scottish pirates, from the royal privileges to the Berne Convention, reveals that the commons is the natural state of human intelligence. Every attempt to enclose it has required massive state violence, surveillance, and legal fiction. By understanding this history, we reclaim our right to the common source, recognizing that our shared past is the only legitimate foundation for our creative future. 4. The metaphors of intellectual property: land versus personal property. The Great Theft was primarily won through the power of metaphor. By calling ideas property and calling their use theft, the monopolists successfully convinced the public that a thought is the same thing as a piece of land. But this metaphor is a lie. If I take your cow, you no longer have a cow. But if I take your idea, we both have an idea. The transition from land metaphors to personal property metaphors has been the final stage of the enclosure. We are taught to treat a song like a car, something that must be paid for every time it is used. This section deconstructs these linguistic traps. It shows how the fence is built first in our language and only later in our laws. By breaking the metaphor of intellectual property and returning to the metaphor of cultural stewardship, we begin to see a path toward an equilibrium where the creator is rewarded but the public is not robbed of its heritage. 5. The future, towards an equilibrium of access and control. As we look toward the horizon, the great theft reaches a stalemate. We stand at a crossroads between two futures. In one, the total enclosure continues, where AI-generated content and digital rights management, DRM, turn every human thought into a microtransaction, and the public domain becomes a forgotten myth. In the other, we achieve a new equilibrium. This equilibrium recognizes that while the creator needs a seasonal fence to survive and prosper, the common soil must eventually be replenished. The future of property is not more or less, but better. We envision a world of shorter copyright terms, robust fair use protections, and a vibrant global digital library of Alexandria that is open to all. The great theft began when we forgot that we are all standing on the shoulders of giants. The journey ends when we realize that the giants themselves never asked for a royalty check. They only asked to be remembered. By dismantling the fences of the mind and restoring the balance of access and control, we ensure that the next chapter of human history will be written not in a private ledger, but in the open book of the world. Epilogue: The Unfencing of the Human Mind. The journey through the history of the great theft brings us to a singular, profound realization. The concept of intellectual property is not a timeless law of nature, but a carefully constructed narrative, a series of fences built over centuries to enclose the once limitless commons of human thought. From the early privileges granted by fearful monarchs to the automatic global enclosures of the digital age, we have witnessed how the vibrant shared heritage of our species was systematically subdivided into private parcels of profit. The Ghost in the Machine. Throughout this book, we have seen that the great theft was never truly about protecting the creator. The author was often used as a moral mask, a starving genius invoked by powerful guilds, booksellers, and corporations to justify their own perpetual monopolies. We saw how the law slowly dematerialized the book, the map, and the painting, turning them into legal ghosts that could be owned long after the physical object had crumbled to dust. We watched as the act of thinking with others was redefined as piracy, and how the collective memory of humanity was transcribed into a private ledger of debt. The persistence of the commons. Yet, even in the face of this total enclosure, the commons has never truly died. It survives in every library, every open-source project, every child who retells a story without asking for a license. The digital revolution has exposed the fundamental truth that ideas are non-rivalrous. They do not diminish when shared, they multiply. The fence is always a temporary and artificial structure, requiring the constant force of the state to keep it standing against the natural human impulse to communicate and create. A call for equilibrium. As we look toward a future dominated by artificial intelligence and algorithmic control, the stakes of the great theft have never been higher. If we allow the patterns of our language, the brushstrokes of our art, and the very codes of our biology to be permanently enclosed, we risk a future where creativity becomes a luxury and the past becomes a closed book. The final lesson of this history is that equilibrium is possible. We can honor the labor of the individual without starving the spirit of the collective. We can reward the season of the creator while ensuring the eternity of the public. To do this, we must reclaim our metaphors. We must stop seeing ideas as land and start seeing them as seeds.
things that belong to the sower for a moment, but ultimately belong to the soil that sustains us all.